Humanicare's webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. First of all, I'd like to thank Humanicare Solutions for doing these webinars. In fact, for putting on this whole series of webinars. And I'd like to also thank you for joining us today when there's so many other things that you could be doing with your valuable time. So we do appreciate you joining us today and sitting in. So to get started, I would like to introduce myself here. My name is Brian Haley. I'm a registered clinical counselor on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. Our presentation today is on resilience, preparing for and overcoming life's challenges. Someone said once a long time ago that life is suffering. That seems like a bit of a harsh statement, but if we look at it and we look at our own lives, we quickly realize that no matter how good life is for us, we do face challenges and difficulties and inevitable life events that cause problems for us. But the interesting thing is that some of us, for some reason, seem to have a better ability to bounce back than others. This is what we usually refer to as resiliency. But the reality, we will see as we go through the presentation here, goes much deeper than that. Before we get going, too, I would like to just request that for those of you that have questions, if you could save those till the end. What I find is that most questions do get answered as we go through the presentation, and if that's not the case, then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at the end to the best of my ability. So I do appreciate that. Thank you. And actually, before we launch into the slides here, too, I would like to just begin with a little story, if I could. Now, some of us might believe, or we might have the understanding or the idea that resilient people are necessarily smarter than the rest of us. But what I'd like to show you in this short story here is that a high IQ does not necessarily guarantee the practical problem-solving abilities that are often characteristics of resiliency. So a lot of you may have heard of an organization called Mensa. And Mensa is an association of people with exceptionally high IQs, really smart folks. Anyway, there was a member of Mensa who was out driving in a rural area once, and he decided to stop and have a bite to eat and just relax for a couple of hours out in the middle of nowhere somewhere. So anyway, after he had had his meal and relaxed for a while, he came out, and to his shock and surprise, there was one of his tires on his sports car was missing. It was stolen. And the person not only stole the tire, but they stole the lug nuts that hold the tire on. So he's standing there scratching his head, wondering, what the heck am I going to do now? I'm stuck. So just about this time, a farmer walked by. And he looked at the car and he looked at the person and he said, so do you have a spare tire? And the Mensa fellow said, well, I do, but I don't have any lug nuts. So I don't know how I'm going to put the tire on. So the farmer looked again at the car and he said, tell you what, get your spare. And also if you have one of those tire wrenches, that'll come in handy. So the guy scratched his head and he thought, okay, well, I'll do it anyway. He got the tire, got the wrench, gave the wrench to the farmer, and the farmer started to walk around the car and took one lug nut off each of the 3 good tires. Came back, put the spare on, and used those 3 lug nuts to put the tire on. There it was. He solved the problem. So the farmer looked at him and said, there, that'll get you back to the city, but please drive slow. You know, so farmers and ranchers are often known for their practical kinds of problem-solving abilities. Maybe some of us have heard the old story of using baling wire and duct tape to fix almost anything. And often this kind of practical intelligence is what leads to resilience, the ability to solve everyday kind of practical problems. So resilience, what are the learning outcomes that we can expect today? first of all, we're going to look at some of the characteristics of resilience, what it is, why should we care about being resilient, what does it mean to us. We're going to look at positivity and how that relates to resilience and how resilience relates to positivity. And by positivity, I mean the new positive psychology that has come to the fore in the last decade or so, and we'll get into that as well. Also be interesting to see and to look at is resilience something that we're born with? Often we think it is, but we'll see that that may be possible that we can develop resiliency skills even if we aren't born with them. And if so, how do we do this? What can we do to become more resilient in our own lives? Let's first look at a definition, a dictionary definition of resiliency. So this is from dictionary.com online. The ability to recover readily from illness, depression, adversity, or the like, and buoyancy. Buoyancy, that ability to bounce back, what we usually think of when we think of resiliency. Oh, well, this may be one of those farmer's tricks, the ability to bounce back. So another definition that kind of expands the idea here, highly resilient people are flexible. They adapt to new circumstances quickly and thrive in constant change. Most important, they expect to bounce back and feel confident that they will. And this is a quote from a book by Al Siebert, who is the author of the bestseller, The Resiliency Advantage. And I highly recommend this book for anybody that wishes to do some more in-depth reading and studying into this topic. Very good book, very helpful. So from Siebert's point of view, resiliency leads to the ability to build and maintain a kind of a personal balance and equilibrium when we're faced with unexpected life events, these challenges and difficulties that show up. And also that resilient people seem to have the ability to, and the desire to learn from life's challenges. We'll come back to this later. They have the knack for creating good luck out of circumstances that many others see as bad luck. Excuse me. So resiliency, another expanded definition, resiliency refers to our capacity to deal with discomfort and adversity, but it's not just a reactive skill set. And that's the important point to make here. It's not simply a reactive skill set, that ability to bounce back. The traits, in fact, that make up a resilient person, they also happen to be traits that contribute to our overall happiness and satisfaction with life in general. You know, things like optimism, flexibility, gratitude, creativity, and so on. And we'll come back to these in more detail later as we move along in the presentation. So here's one of those inevitable brick walls that we often face in life. The interesting thing here, I think, is that resilient people always seem to have the ability to see more than one solution to a problem when they're faced with these life challenges and so on. So resiliency, again, another expanded definition, is the capacity to prepare for, to recover from, to adapt in the face of stress, and also to avoid in the first place often these challenging situations. This is from the research of Barbara Fredrickson, who wrote a fascinating book called Positivity. And she's one of the key contributors to the whole positive psychology movement. And we'll be looking at some of Barbara's work in a little more depth as we go along. But she points out that resiliency is the ability to be prepared for the challenges and adversity. But she also is hinting here that there are things that we can do to increase our own resilience. And of course, a key one, never give up. In fact, a long-term study of 99 Harvard males showed that the way people view negative life events predicted their physical health 5 and even 35 years down the road. And what we mean by how they view these negative life events is, did they see them as fixed and unchangeable or temporary and subject to influence? Are we able to influence those negative events to change them? Now, resilience is affected by and in turn affects all of the aspects of who we are. And resilience is more common than we think. In fact, everyone can learn and train to be more resilient. This is from another study done by two medical doctors, Southwick and Charney, and this was the conclusion that they came to after their in-depth research. And Al Siebert adds, of course, to this that the most empowering finding in resiliency psychology research is that we all have an inborn predisposition to become resilient and change proficient. So even if we're not born with this trait or this ability, we all have an inborn predisposition to develop these skills. And this is an amazing and important finding. So when we think of resilience, we need to look at these four quadrants of what makes us up as a human being. And all of these four are important to look at in terms of the development of resiliency in our lives. It's and one thing to note here too, looking at these four quadrants, is that it's almost always the emotional area that drains our batteries. I think most of us can relate to that. Difficult times and challenges, it's really the difficult emotions that go along with the event and that come up in us that really drains our batteries, really tends to give us, makes the difficulty and the challenge even more difficult. What that comes down to really, and what they're finding in the psychology research, especially positive psychology, is that it points to an inability to self-regulate our emotions. And that's what really is contributing to that draining of the emotional batteries. So this self-regulation of our emotions basically leads to and contributes to whether or not we develop or have a resilient personality. So what do we mean by this? Well, firstly, it means that the challenges and difficulties of life do not overwhelm us. We're able to adapt and to be flexible in the face of these unexpected life events. Secondly, in terms of self-regulating our emotions, we learn to focus on positive emotions like gratitude, joy, happiness, creativity. So, focusing on the positive, not being overwhelmed when faced with inevitable life challenges, equals resiliency. In fact, when we stay stuck in negative emotions, we get caught in what I call a downward spiral. We've all heard the term going from bad to worse. That's what happens when we get stuck or kind of glued to negative emotions that show up in our life when we're faced with a difficult situation. When we focus or shift our focus, I should say, to positive emotions, we get drawn up into an upward spiral. That upward spiral continues to feed itself and leads to and is a sign of resiliency. Now this is an interesting concept idea that came out of some of these studies. People who believe that their fate is under the control of outside forces act in ways that confirm their beliefs. People who know they can do things to make life better act in ways that confirm their beliefs. Both belief systems, therefore, are self-validating. And this again is from Al Siebert's work in the Resiliency Advantage. I don't believe in pessimism. If something doesn't come up the way you want, forge ahead. If you think it's going to rain, it will. Some wise words from Clint Eastwood, whether you like his movies or not. I tend to like him, especially the later ones, where he's directing and so on. So we look at three things here from an article by Diane Coutu, the senior editor of the Harvard Business Review, How Resiliency Works. And the conclusions that she came to in this article were that if the signs of resilience are a firm acceptance of reality, a deep belief that life is meaningful, and an uncanny ability to improvise, to be creative when faced with hardships. You know, it brings up an interesting question too, is why is it that some people suffer real hardships and do not seem to falter, whereas you have some organizations as well that overcome seemingly insurmountable odds to prosper, while other companies cave in at the slightest adversity. In her research, Coutu found that resilient individuals, and in fact resilient organizations, share these three unique traits. And she concluded that you can bounce back from hardship with just one or two of these qualities, but you will only truly be resilient with all three present in our life. So this dynamic of meaning making is a very important one, and we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes here. And most researchers agree on this aspect as well. And a word from the famous President Abe Lincoln, the best thing about the future is that it comes one day at a time. So we can just bite off pieces, smaller pieces in terms of dealing with our difficulties and challenges, smaller pieces that are workable and manageable. And here's a quote from Viktor Frankl, who wrote a famous book called Man's Search for Meaning. And Dr. Frankl was a prisoner in the concentration camps in World War II, and he'd been there for several years, and somehow had survived to that point. But he realized at some point how trivial and meaningless his life had become in there. As one might imagine, it's basically just about survival, or was about survival. But what he decided to do to try to help himself get through this very, very extremely difficult situation was to set some goals. And how he did that was he visualized himself giving lectures after the war on how he survived the concentration camps, when in fact at the time he really didn't know if he would survive or not. Another interesting thing as well is that Frankl said in his book that often the optimists were some of the first people to perish in the concentration camps. And that seems like a little bit of an odd kind of statement to make. One would think that the optimists would be the ones that would survive. And we'll get into this a little bit more as we go along and see why optimism is good, but sometimes excessive optimism can actually cause more problems for us in the long run. So resilient people have an inclination also towards creativity or inventiveness. They make the best of what they have to find solutions to problems. And back to Viktor Frankl's book, he believed that staying grounded in these challenging times allows us to see that there's always more than one solution to a problem. And one of the things that some of the prisoners did that he noticed was that when they walked around in the yards, in the prison yards, they would collect small bits of metal or string or little pieces of wood or whatever they could find, and they would keep those for later use. They may need to fix a pair of boots at some point that were falling apart, or tie together a mattress that was coming apart. And sometimes they would, if they didn't have a need themselves, they would trade some of the string or bits of metal for something that they did need with another prisoner. So again, just being very, very creative and inventive in the most difficult of situations. And in fact, it's always good to have a plan, regardless of how difficult our situation. So yeah, just as a can opener does not open a can by itself, simply reading about resiliency skills or listening to a webinar, in fact, will not make a person more resilient. This is common sense, but it's worth noting because our intention really to develop resiliency skills and methods that work for us individually is what really determines how we'll do with this. And like we said earlier, a few people seem to be born resilient, but that really is the exception than the rule. For the rest of us, however, we do have inborn resiliency potentials, as we mentioned earlier. It's really a matter of discovering those and developing these innate skills that we all have. So how do we do that? Well, I've come up with 5 things that we can do to increase our positivity and, as a result, build our resiliency. First, be open in both mind and heart. Nurture the positive. Live to learn. Take care of ourselves. And to cultivate humor. So let's look at the first one, to be open in mind and heart. Openness. Openness leads to positivity. Positivity leads to openness. They are reciprocal, in fact. They enhance and increase each other. So when we focus on openness, what we're doing is we're throwing open the doors to positivity and vice versa. And we open again that, or contribute to that upward spiral that we mentioned earlier. So how do we become more open? Well, there's several ways, but which we'll look at. One of them is that it helps to develop a sense of or acceptance and calmness. And one of the key ways that we can do that is something called mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation, in particular, as compared to other meditations, is a key way to cultivate openness. And we'll talk a little bit more about mindfulness meditation as we go along, but it's one of the main tools that we can use to develop that acceptance and calmness and openness. Another key aspect of openness is curiosity. Curiosity really is essential to resilience, and this has come up in the positive psychology research. People with closed minds tend to refuse to listen to information or feedback that they don't want to hear. So I think it can be useful for all of us, to check ourselves to see, am I doing that? Am I closing my mind off to things that I don't want to hear, to information or feedback that might even help me? But I've got my mind set on the way things are and the way they should be, and I'm therefore not open to other ideas or possibilities that could help. So curiosity is a very valuable habit that we can develop that helps us to nurture and develop an automatic openness that leads to more resiliency. And in studies, researchers found that serotonin is used more efficiently by people who have just engaged in an act of kindness. And for those of you who don't know, serotonin is the neurotransmitter that's associated with feelings of happiness and well-being. So positivity then leads to resilience. Resilience leads to positivity. Again, reciprocal. So acts of kindness and compassion, or we could even say love, have a positive effect and a cumulative effect, in fact, on our sense of well-being. And when our sense of well-being increases, our resiliency goes up. So the more we build on that, then the more we have the capacity to reach out and help others who may be suffering or in pain. So the more our positivity goes up, leads to more resilience, resiliency goes up, and again, we're back in that upward spiral that we talked about earlier. So kindness, giving our shoes away, for instance, in this picture here, it's obviously helpful to the person who needs those shoes, but it's also good for our own health. So also receiving and appreciating kindness from others may be just as important as offering it. And what's the key? The key is gratitude. Because gratitude, it turns out to be an very important part of resiliency. If we look at the research of Sonia Lubomirsky from the University of California, she found that grateful people experience more optimism, joy, enthusiasm, and other positive emotions, and are therefore more resilient. That's a wonderful finding, I think. So when adversity strikes, gratitude for the things that are going right in our life helps put difficult times in perspective. What does that mean? Well, by appreciating those things in our life that we may be taking for granted is a good place to start. So as we know, I think most of us know, our emotions typically respond to dramatic kinds of changes. But a lot of good things, such as a roof over our head, the ability to feed our children, a career that we enjoy, all of these may be stable in our lives. And as a result, unfortunately for a lot of us, they kind of fade into the background. We take them for granted, basically. So what we can do to remedy that is deliberately draw our attention to them. So a good starting place there would be to write down all of the good things in our life that we can identify. And I know there's probably some of you out there that like Oprah or enjoy. I've enjoyed watching Oprah from time to time, and she mentioned on one of her shows keeping a gratitude journal. I thought it was a brilliant idea. And a gratitude journal is that very thing, just writing down everything that we're grateful for, everything that we have appreciation for in our lives. Seems like a simple task, but again, just by the fact of writing these things down, they contribute again to that upward spiral and to positivity in our lives and to resiliency. So at this point, I'd like to take a few minutes to do an actual practical kind of application of this. So for those of you that would like to join in with me, that would be wonderful. Those that aren't comfortable doing it, that's fine. This is only going to take a couple minutes. So first of all, what I'd like you to do is to just, I'm imagining you're sitting already, but to sit quietly, to close our eyes for a minute. And let's just take a couple of deep breaths in and out through the nose. Okay, now as we're breathing, let's go back to normal breathing, and I would like you to focus your attention in the heart area. So as you're breathing in, you imagine the air is coming directly into your heart and then directly out of your heart, still breathing in through the nose, but imagining it coming directly into the heart and out of the heart. Now, what I would like you to do is to think of someone or something in your life that you have a great amount of appreciation for or gratitude. And you can imagine the person in your mind's eye or the event. And the key here is to really feel the appreciation, really feel it in the heart center. So continue to breathe in and out from the heart. And see if you can generate that feeling of appreciation, really feel it in the heart. Someone that we really feel gratitude for, appreciation. So the idea is to hold on to that feeling of appreciation and gratitude for as long as we can. In fact, if we can do it for 2 minutes, that's kind of ideal. And then what we do from there is we take that, absorb that feeling, and then take it with us to whatever it is that we're doing next and try to hold on to that feeling, that felt sense of the gratitude or appreciation for as long as we can. And of course, we can do this many times during the day. It's a very simple but a very powerful technique. It's called heart coherence. And I highly recommend it. I use it all the time. So gratitude. Gratitude is the open door to abundance. Why is that? I think because the more gratitude that we feel for things in our life, then the more abundant we're going to feel, because we're taking notice of the things that maybe or perhaps we have taken for granted in our lives. So another important neuroscience researcher in the area of resiliency And Positivity is and an author. He explains how to create the experience of gratitude. He says to have the experience, to enrich it, and to absorb it. And hopefully that's what we just did in the exercise that the heart coherence technique that we just did. This is a good example of what Dr. Hansen is talking about in his research. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the second point, focus on the positive. Positivity, what is it? Why does it matter? And is it an indicator of resiliency? Well, we've already seen that it is. We're going to expand on that now. First, we'll look at what it's not. Positivity is not a Pollyannish perspective of the world. And what exactly do I mean by that, Pollyannish perspective of the world? For those of you that don't know, well, all that means really is an excessive or blind kind of optimism that people can sometimes get stuck in. So we're not talking about being excessively or blindly optimistic here. Neither are we talking about a kind of grin and bear it type of approach or attitude to life. And lastly, we're certainly not talking about a don't worry, be happy kind of song that we sing to ourselves. So positivity is much more than that, really. Positivity includes the full range of positive emotions, as we can see here, love, appreciation, and so on. But as we did with the heart coherence exercise, the real key is to feel the positive emotions in order for them to have a genuine impact. So increasing our positive experience is actually more important than decreasing our negative ones. Pleasant, positive experiences revitalize us. They boost our immunity to emotional toxicity and gives us more strength to sustain ourselves in adverse circumstances. And again, it's important that the activity completely absorbs us. Another thing worth noting about this is that things like positive self-talk can be a part of the overall positivity plan or our own overall positivity plan, but it's not enough, as we'll see as we go along here. And another note from Barbara Fredrickson, over time, positive emotions literally change who we are. And this is a result of a decade of research that she has done. Actually, almost 2 decades now. So at this point, I'd like to, again, tell a short story. And this one is about a First Nations story that goes back in time. Who knows how long ago, but it's a great little story. It'll only take a minute to tell here, and it goes like this. One evening, a Cherokee elder told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between 2 wolves that are inside all of us. One is evil. It is anger, jealousy, sorrow, regret, lies, resentment, that sort of thing. The other is good. It is love, joy, peace, humility, kindness, empathy, compassion, and so on." The grandson looked at his grandfather and thought about it for a minute and asked his grandfather, "Grandfather, which wolf wins?" The old Cherokee grandfather simply said, "The one we feed." The one we feed. So, how do we feed the good wolf in our own lives? It's interesting to note that resilient people have the ability to experience both negative and positive emotions, even in difficult or painful situations. So when not so resilient people face difficulties, usually all of their emotions turn negative. If things are good, they feel good, but if things are bad, they feel awful. And they get caught up in that downward spiral we talked about. Resilient people, on the other hand, tend to find some silver lining in even the worst of circumstances. But they're not pushing away the negative as well. They feel the desperation, they feel the frustration, the anger, the sadness, just as the rest of us do. But they're able to also at the same time focus in on the positive at the same time and experience both. So the resilient person isn't papering over the negative emotions, but is instead letting them sit side by side with other feelings. This is the Chinese symbol for crisis, which is a good example. In a sense, it could almost represent resilience because the two words that make it up, Wei and Ji, also mean danger and opportunity. So Wei Ji equals danger plus opportunity, and resilient people are able and aware to feel the danger and the difficulty, but they're also able to often find the hidden opportunity that lies there. So another one from Al Siebert: if you argue with reality, you add to your difficulties. It's a fact of life that we become enmeshed in what we choose to fight against. Resistance to the reality of life leads to more difficulties and suffering, is what Al Siebert came to the conclusion of. And there's one other quick quote that I can't remember who it was, who the author was, but they said, if you argue with reality, you'll lose, but only every time. I always like that quote. So acceptance is a big part, an important part of resiliency. And again, resiliency can be learned, as we talked about before. Moving on a little bit here so that we can get through the slides. First of all, we want to look at some of the bad news. Our brains are naturally wired to pay more attention to negative events than positive ones. Why? Because it's a built-in survival mechanism that goes back to prehistoric times. Our ancestors, in order to survive, basically had to react to negative circumstances more quickly than positive so that they wouldn't end up being lunch for a saber-toothed tiger or a T-Rex or something like that. So as a result, our brains naturally gravitate to the negative. Negative thoughts are like Velcro. Positive thoughts are like Teflon. This according to the research of Dr. Hansen. Wow, this seems like a no-win situation at first glance. I mean, what chance do we have if this is the case? But Hansen and other neuroscience researchers, in fact, have shown that by focusing on the positive, we can essentially rewire our brains for the better. This is a very, very important finding. But like all things, it takes practice and focus. I'm going to skip through that slide. Dr. Hansen, in his work then, in his research, is pointing really to what we call neuroplasticity. It's the innate ability of the brain to rewire itself. And up until really about a decade or so, there was a long-held belief that once the brain gets wired a certain way, that's it for life, that it's never going to change. But in fact, the new research is showing that this is not true. The brain can, in fact, rewire itself. So the good news, or more good news, in reality, we experience positive events with much greater frequency than negative experiences. So an important key then to building resiliency is to notice and appreciate. Notice and appreciate the positive experiences whenever and wherever they occur. Focus on the can instead of the can't. One way to do that, of course, is to savor our positive experiences, and we touched on that a little earlier with the gratitude journal. But also taking time to enjoy and savoring, so when we get some good news, sharing it with a significant other. If we receive praise at work or something good happened in our life, share it with our partner or a good friend. Taking the time to do that really, really adds to the building of that upward spiral. Personally, I find it helpful to focus attention in my heart center and re-engage the positive emotion, whatever it might have been, experiencing it all over again with feeling, just like we did in the heart coherence technique earlier. So what are we grateful for today? Another way, of course, is to count our blessings. What do we mean by that? Well, we can begin by noticing the little things. Make a list of the good things we experienced this week. Be open to being on the receiving end of kindness as well, accepting kindness and so on with an open heart. Well, a good reason is because gratitude turns what we have into enough. So noticing our own acts of kindness. As the Dalai Lama says, be kind wherever possible, and according to him, it's always possible. So just as we talked about starting a gratitude journal, we can also start a kindness journal. Keep track of all the times that we were kind to someone else. Let's move on now to number 3, which is live to learn. As Mahatma Gandhi said, learn as if you were to live forever. Lifelong learning. We all face difficulties and problems in life, sometimes unexpectedly. Resilience grows and evolves as we leverage challenges into opportunities. And this is a good thing to note. Real people make mistakes. Happy people accept that. So we make mistakes, and even happy people know that they're going to make mistakes because it's to be human is to make mistakes. But they can accept that and then also move on from that and focus on the positive in their life. Yes, and resilient people are also, in addition to that, able to take out what we call a counterintuitive step towards the pain. This alone is a huge stride towards building resiliency. And one of the best ways to prepare ourselves for that is back to the mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation teaches us to take a very, very important pause. And when we take that pause, then we have the ability to make a choice rather than coming from our previous experience and our previous preconceived ideas and notions about things. It's in a forum like this, it's too short to be able to get into talking about mindfulness meditation to a great deal, but there are many qualified mindfulness meditation instructors in all major centers now. So if you are interested in that, it sounds like it appeals to you, I would encourage you to check that out. So resilient people ask questions as well, but the questions they ask are a particular kind of questions that I call learner questions. Questions like, what is useful here? Or what are my available choices? On the other hand, non-resilient people usually ask judger type questions. What's wrong? Who's to blame? Why me? So learner questions are neutral and non-judgmental, but judging type questions really are obviously negative and they do not lead to solutions. So I would say that it's helpful for all of us to question our questioning style. Do I look for choices or do I look for blame? Learner questions are empowering. They promote more expansive thinking, and they improve also how we relate to others. So here are some final tips on living to learn. Follow our passions, dream about our future, and apply our strengths. Looking at what motivates us, what do I feel passionate about? And that can be in any area of our life, not just our work, but in terms of sports, hobbies, art, creativity. We touched on earlier as well about visualization. So when we talk about dreaming about the future and applying our strengths, visualizations can play a huge part in that. Just sitting down and daydreaming and having a visualization of what we may do down the road in a positive way, because visualizations, it's been found in the research, activate the same part of the brain that the actual activity does. Visualizations, in fact, generate positive emotions. Top athletes, for example, use visualizations all the time. I remember an interview that I heard with Wayne Gretzky, who said that when he's playing on the ice, he sees, or he did see when he played, 3 or 4 moves ahead, and he would go to where he knew the puck was going to be, and often there it was. It would show up. Same when he was going in to shoot the puck for a goal. He would actually see the puck going in the net before he took the shot. And he talked that openly about that, and obviously no one can argue that worked for him. Oh yes, the classic half empty and half full scenario. I won't say any more about that. We'll just move on for the sake of time here to the number 4, the next category of taking care of ourselves. Good health equals mental and emotional resilience. And again, we're back to these 4 quadrants. And to build our resiliency, it's actually important for us to focus on all 4 of these. So taking good care of ourselves means bringing attention to all aspects, all of the 4 quadrants here. And when we do create a happy life in all of these areas, then resilience will help us to meet the inevitable, unexpected life events that come along. So, in terms of the physical, things like regular exercise, walking in the forest, by the ocean, doing yoga, tai chi, qigong, these sorts of things, dancing. In the mental area, formal meditation, which we've touched on a few times, yoga, relaxation exercises, taking time for daydreaming, as we just talked about. These are all important for building resilience in the mental area. I think I'll skip that slide for now. In the emotional area, keeping a gratitude journal and a kindness journal, like we talked about earlier. Spending time with loved ones, volunteering, focusing on the positive. In the spiritual, of course, finding meaning and purpose in our life. And again, I would recommend the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Excellent book, and can get us in touch with that side of things. Also connecting with a spiritual practice or a tradition. For some of us, it may mean returning to a church that we haven't been to for a while. Practicing compassion by volunteering or getting involved in humanitarian projects. I just like this slide because it sort of encapsulates all of those quadrants, I believe. So this came up in the last one. Strong social connections also increase our resiliency. And I wanted to point out a particular study here back from 2006. It was a study of 3,000 nurses who had breast cancer. And so it's a large study, so it's really speaking quite loudly to this whole thing. But what was found as a result of the study was that those nurses who had 10 or more friends were more likely to survive the disease than nurses without close friends. I think that's worth repeating. So those with 10 or more friends were 4 times more likely to survive breast cancer than the nurses without close friends. So this really does point to the power of strong social connections in terms of increasing our resiliency. So the last category is to cultivate humor. As Snoopy says, every time you find some humor in a difficult situation, you win. I like that. I don't know if how many of you have heard of Norman Cousins. He was a senior editor of the Saturday Review, a monthly magazine back in the 70s, I think it was, 60s, 70s. But what Norman Cousins did was he cured himself of an incurable disease with humor. The doctors essentially told Cousins that there was no cure for what his illness was. And rather than of course, he felt the negative feelings like all of us do when he heard the bad news. He felt despair and frustration and sadness, anger, all of these emotions that we all feel. But he, in a very short period of time, decided that he wasn't going to allow that to take over. He wasn't going to allow that to put him into that downward spiral. So what he did, what worked for him, was he locked himself into a hotel room, took vitamins, and watched non-stop Marx Brothers comedies. Now, Marx Brothers comedies, I don't really find personally very funny, but whatever comedy works for you. The idea here is that the important result, I should say, is that because he was a writer, he got that story out there, and this story, his story, about how humor cured him led to many, many studies about the effectiveness of humor in health. So, as a result of those studies, we now know that laughter boosts the immune system, triggers the release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers. Yes, I think we've all been in this situation. In fact, I had some problems with my computer this morning, and I thought I might not even be able to make it here. But it all worked out, luckily. We also know now that laughter balances the blood pressure, improves mental functions like alertness, memory, and creativity. So if we think about it for a moment, when we're laughing, we're not really thinking of anything else, are we? We could have a serious illness like Norman Cousins did. We have other life problems or difficulties or challenges. But if we're laughing, if we're really in a good full belly laugh, we don't even think about those things, at least for that time period. But as we've seen, because of the studies, the releasing of endorphins and all these other physiological benefits from humor and laughter, we can see how much it contributes to resiliency and survivability, really. So making humor a part of our life is another way to build resiliency. In fact, playful humor enhances survival for many reasons. Laughing reduces tension to more moderate levels. It's what Al Siebert found in his research. Yes, and sense of humor often can be like a lifesaver. So let's look at some of the findings here then from something called laughter therapy, or often it's called laughter yoga, and I'll talk a little bit about that. What does laughter therapy and humor in general help with? Well, to improve our overall attitude, reduce stress and tension, promote relaxation, improve sleep, enhances quality of life, strengthens social bonds and relationships, and helps to produce a general sense of well-being. So some of us might even want to consider looking into laughter yoga. If we find that we don't have a lot of humor in our lives, we have a difficult time just finding humor in life itself, or we're not drawn to comedies and that sort of a thing. And this is quite common. I'll just tell you a little story. I remember doing a workshop a number of years ago, and it wasn't a laughter yoga workshop, but one segment of the workshop included a session on laughter yoga. And really, it's not about telling jokes or humor like watching a funny movie or something like that. It's really laughing as a kind of an exercise. So what the person leading the workshop did was we all stood in a circle facing each other, and you start off with a kind of a fake laughter, like ha ha ha, he he, that sort of a thing, and then it keeps building and building until it starts to turn into real laughter. And I don't know about you, but when I'm around somebody who's like really having a good belly laugh, it's hard not to laugh yourself. And so basically it's contagious, and that's what happens in the laughter yoga sessions. It's contagious, and then before you know it, everybody is having a really good belly laugh, and it just keeps building on itself. And of course, then we are able to realize all of these benefits that we see here from humor, from laughter. Ah, yes, and resilient people are able to laugh at themselves. An ability that I believe we can all cultivate, perhaps through things like laughter yoga or watching some good comedies. Resilient people don't take themselves or life too seriously because they realize that we all make mistakes, and none of us gets it right all the time. We all face challenges in life and difficulties. Yes, and the key to meditation is learning to stay. I have a real appreciation for how hard it is for dogs to stay after practicing meditation for a while. It's not as easy as it looks. So, summaries and conclusions, what have we learned? 5 things we can do to increase our positivity and build our resiliency. Being open, nurturing positive emotions, living to learn, taking care of ourselves, cultivating humor. What are some of the benefits as a result of that? We find more meaning and purpose in life, receive more social support, report fewer aches and pains, headaches, and so on. We sleep better. We display a mindful awareness of the present moment. We're right in the moment, realizing and aware of what's happening around us and to us. We have increased positive relations with others. That's a good thing. We feel more effective at what we do. We're better able to savor the good things in life. And we can see more possible solutions to problems rather than just getting stuck in one way of doing it or one viewpoint or one opinion or concept of how we might get out of a situation or deal with a difficult situation or problem in our life. Oh yes, I wanted to show this slide just in passing here. It's an awesome movie. I just loved it. It's called The Life of Pi. And really it could be called The Life of Resilience because it's all about this young man and how resilient he has to be to survive in a lifeboat with some wild animals and after the ship that he was in goes down at sea. And he was lost at sea in this lifeboat for months and months. Anyway, it's an amazing metaphor for resilience. Highly recommend the movie if you haven't seen it. So that wraps it up for today, and we're just under the wire here in terms of time, so thank you so much for your time and attention. Again, my name is Brian Haley. I'm a registered clinical counselor on the Sunshine Coast in BC, and here's some resource information from Humanicare, and I hope that this has been helpful. I'd like to acknowledge again once more Humanicare Solutions for putting on these webinar series. I think they're wonderful, and I wish you all the best to all of you who are listening in today, and may you too discover your own resilience. Oh yes, also before we go, I would like to say that if anybody has any questions, please feel free to send them in, and I'll do my best to answer. We won't have time to do it right now, but if you do forward those, I will get back to you through Humanicare. And last but not least, I wanted to do a shout out to a particular segment of the population, which sometimes we don't notice when we talk about things like resiliency. We're usually talking about organizations and companies and people in terms of their career and their work life and so on. But I wanted to do a big shout out to single mothers who are amazingly resilient. They have to be to survive and to provide for themselves and their children. Also to families with special needs kids. Often they get missed in terms of the buzz around resiliency and so on, but I think every family with special needs kids deserves our notice and our appreciation for what they do on a day-to-day basis in terms of being resilient and getting through those tough times that can be there for on a daily basis. And last but not least, those of you or others that you know that may be suffering from depression or anxiety, etc., and so on, and yet somehow you find a way to be resilient and to get through it and to move on with your life. So kudos to all of you, and again, may you all discover your own resilience, and may we all have a happy and resilient new year. Thanks for listening.